and there shall be desolation, because thou hast forgotten the God of thy salvation, and hast not been mindful of the rock of thy strength. Therefore shalt thou plant pleasant plants, and shall set it with strange lips. In the day shalt thou make thy plant to grow, and in the morning shalt thou make thy seed to flourish. But the harvest shall be a heap in the day of grief and of desperate sorrow.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. We're continuing taking the book of Daniel. Sorry, we missed a lot last week. Just when I think things are going to settle down, things just don't work out. Just when I think I know when I have my Bible studies, according to my website, it says between, 7 and 11? Anyways, better late than never. As a friend of mine was fond of saying of me. So let's read it. We're going to read the whole chapter. 18 was kind of an arbitrary point I picked, as you remember. We kind of just talked about certain aspects of Belshazzar and of leadership and such. All right. Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and he drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, whiles he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem. And the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines drank in them. They drank wine, and praised the gods of gold, and of silver, and of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand, and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. The king spake and said unto the wise men of Babylon, Whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonied. Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house. And the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of thy father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar, thy father, the king, I say, thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. Everyone uses such long sentences. For as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams, and showing of hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts, were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. Then was Daniel brought in before the king. And the king spake and said unto Daniel, Art thou that Daniel, which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? I have even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, and that they should read this writing, and make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But they could not show the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of thee, that thou canst make interpretations, and dissolve doubts. Now if thou canst read the writing, and make known to me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shalt be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, hold on 1 second. I need a second. Thank you for being patient. Here we go. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing unto the king, and make known unto him the interpretation. O thou king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom and majesty and glory and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he slew, and whom he would, he kept alive, and whom he would set up, and whom he would, he put down. But when his heart was lifted up, and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And he was driven from the sons of men. And his heart was made like unto the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild asses, and they fed him with the grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whomsoever he will. And thou, his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thy heart, though thou knewest all this, but hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven. And they have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords, thy wives and thy concubine have drunk wine in them, and thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold, of brass, iron, wood, and stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know. And the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified. Then was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. And the writing that was written, and this is the writing that was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet, and put a chain of gold about his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him, that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. In that night was Belshazzar the king of the Chaldeans slain, and Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So I always like this chapter. It's a very vivid story. I even used, like I said, a lot of things from the Bible. I go the extra mile, or can you read the handwriting on the wall? Right? We use that to this very day. Even people who don't know the Bible very often know that idiom. They may not know where it comes from, but here it is. In my song Freedom Convoy, I ask the dictator of Canada, who everyone knows is Thurston Castro, the son of Fidel Castro. He, I said, and I hope that's my sense of humor. It means you never, I like to give it to you dead. I said, oh, can't you see the writing on the wall? You've got no clothes on, you demagogue at all. Using actually several different idioms there, because the idea of being without clothes on is like the emperor's new clothes, which is not a biblical story, but it is a very good story. So the idea of seeing the handwriting on the wall. And like I said, one of the things I keyed on last time, and I'm going to go over these verses a little bit more of the earlier ones than I thought I would, because I realized I We didn't do much detail. Like I said, these are not. This isn't. Daniel doesn't read like Isaiah. You know, it's not like each verse is like just like something to stop and think about, because this is a narrative. We get the whole picture in our mind. The king is having a banquet. All his wives, his concubines are there. They bring out the vessels of the house of God. They drink from them. And we start praising all these gods. We talked about, it's not necessarily that they were saying gods of gold, gods of silver. It may have been they were praising all their gods. And those gods are gods of gold and silver and of brass and iron, wood and stone. There's a point. The Bible, especially some of the prophets of Daniel's time, like Ezekiel, and also some of the things that you find written, I believe also there are similar sentiments expressed in the Psalms, about having eyes and seeing not. Many of the prophets, this is part of their argument against the gods of the nations, that they are merely gods of gold, silver, iron, wood, and stone. They're not gods of glory. They're not gods of reality. They're not gods in whose hands our life is really being held. And we honor things that are not gods. They sacrifice to demons, not gods. To gods that were newly come up, not the true God. Gods that men invented. Gods that he had not seen. That no one had seen previously, because they are, and people would wonder, like how, well, if man knew God from the beginning, how did they get all these other gods? Why didn't you just stay with the one God that they knew? And that's the thing, is that as man, well, if you think about it in terms of when when man is cast out from the garden, that is ever after, God has withdrawn himself from us, and that is a picture of the state in which we live, where we are not living in fellowship with God as portrayed in the story of Eden, where the first man is in a basically perfect world that's been created for him, where he has need of nothing, not even clothes. He's just tending a garden in which there's all this fruit to eat, which is good for the good to eat, and for for whatever purposes one needs to be sustained. But we live in the world which is fallen, in which we have to seek God if we want to find him. Man is known forever to seek God. But the problem is, as Paul says, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, but corrupted the image into something like unto themselves. Because, people will say religion was invented to control man. Well, I wouldn't say that entirely, because man needs religion. Now, man uses religion to control people. That's not untrue. But there are a lot of reasons to control oneself. Even, because again, if you think about it, look, in the absence of religion today, people have all kinds of ideas about how people ought to be controlled. And they're maybe not so healthy as religion. You know what I mean? Maybe religion is one of the softer ways to get people to behave. There's a lot of other ways we could control people other than with things like God says you should do this. But he's not here right now, so I guess you can get away with it if you dare. If you dare. He dared. He dared. So, I don't want to get bogged down talking about the whole thing again, though I kind of like just doing that. I wanted to see if there's anything else. So we talked about the gods. I doubt they were actually saying, oh, the gods of gold. And they could have. That sounds like something people in a drunken state would be like, the gods of gold and silver. But I think they were just saying gods that are made out of these things. Because, the richer you are, your gods would be gold. If you were poorer, they might be made of wood or stone. And so, why the disembodied hand? This is the only time that anything like this is thing. The hand comes and writes. He sees the part of the fingers of a man's hand writing on the wall. It wrote over against the candlestick of the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And it's not like writing just appears there. He sees it. And I do like when he says, I like him back here because I always liked in the Bible when they talked about the joints of their loins being loosed. I don't know why. It just sounded, the joints of his loins were loosed and his knees smote one against another. Isn't that one of the most delightful Bible verses you could possibly read. I don't know, something about the language there. Sometimes you gotta love the King James. I don't even want to look at what the NIV did to such a beautiful verse. I just like it because it's just such a tasty phrase and it's unusual today. Joints, but what does it mean? The joint. Well, it means some sort of weakness entering in. Like what I don't know if you've ever been in a state where either through injury or through even psychological trauma, you begin to lose consciousness, and you become weakened by a shock. Sometimes shocking news can overwhelm people, and they can, like your body will become overwhelmed because you get a threat response in your brain. You think it, your brain automatically, and it triggers all these systems, and sometimes it's too much for us that fast, and we can lose consciousness or something like that, or not necessarily lose consciousness, but like you feel like this sway. Like I remember when my son was 7 months old and in the hospital, and we were there like 2 a.m. or something, and the doctor's telling us, I'm going to do this operation for the stomach where all the blood was, it was bleeding internally and stuff. And it's like, your son may not live through this operation. I remember listening to that news, and everything was going dark, and I was seeing tunnel vision, and it was very, it was a frightening moment. I was a young father. I'd never experienced anything like that. The whole thing, that changed me a lot. Having children changes you, but having one nearly die on you a couple times is also, it puts you through. I definitely, like some of the things like unwanted thoughts afterwards. It's like, yeah, it can be stressful and traumatic, I guess. I don't like to, I always see things as like not black and white. Like someone's like, oh, I got PTSD. It's like, well, I had a traumatic stress, and so I have a little bit of stress. I don't like to think in terms of disorder. It's just like the consequences. It's just what it's when we fail to internalize it, I think, somehow, or like when we don't process it properly, it can haunt us terribly. That if he had died, I think it would have haunted me awfully. Many things from that day, or from those days, I should say, because there's a couple of big days and then a couple of weeks. Anyways, so he was terrified, and that's why when it says joints of loins be loose, loins. When you go to fight, it says gird up your loins like a man. So and the loins, I always think of it as like your soft middle, or whatever, or like the parts that join you together. I always forget the tender loin. When I think of it, I think of it as the inside of the leg, of like the thigh. But his I don't think by going to the Hebrew we're going to get any insight on that, because we know what it means. It's like, as far as like he was terrified, because one can imagine. I remember telling someone sometime that if I saw a ghost, I would scare the crud out of me, just naturally. Not that I'm fearful of a ghost, but the uncanny nature of seeing something like a disembodied hand floating, writing on your wall, would definitely send me into it would disrupt my sense of reality. You know what I mean? And who could blame him for being terrified? I remember someone saying, oh, I wouldn't be afraid of a ghost. It's just a spirit, just a spirit. Oh, you see spirits every day? Wandering around? I don't. If I did, I'd be used to it. Sure, I'd be no big deal, just like you. I doubt that guy would be listening, but I always thought it was funny that he was just thought there'd be no big deal. I'm like, well, I would be a bit startled, honestly. Sorry, I don't see them every day. I wouldn't be like, oh, like if I saw a giraffe outside, I wouldn't be like, oh, a giraffe. I know what that is. It's just a giraffe. It's just a quadruped. I recognize that. It's like, but I've seen one at the zoo. I would be less freaked out by that. I would be less freaked out by a giraffe. Why not? I know it's a living animal that I'm familiar with. I don't really believe in ghosts, other than the Holy Ghost, and that's not really a ghost, is it? Not in the way we use the word, of course. But I don't, certainly, I don't believe in ghosts like the way they're portrayed in the movie, that's for sure. I mean, I do believe man has a spirit and all that, and there's a lot of mystery, I think, to that. Even in the Bible, it is, well, it's something people find cause to debate over it. I don't think, it's funny because it seems like sometimes almost everything has cause for debate over it. But I don't, that may be true at the extreme, but in the middle, not really. I mean, a lot of stuff is settled among most Christians. All right, when that stuff comes undone is when the real hell's going to break loose. So the wise men, of course, they can't read it. He was greatly troubled. His lords were astonished. I guess he wanted to see the writing, so that's even worse. And his lords, and it is astonishing because like these men are learned from all different, probably from different places that Nebuchadnezzar had conquered, because they had a practice of taking the wise people from other kingdoms and making them eunuchs in the king's house. So, this is ancient how you build a kingdom. This is, right? And the queen is the one who reminds him about Daniel. I say reminds because he should probably know. He even says, I hear of thee, he probably had heard, but, he's a big shot. He doesn't, even the big lords, even though Daniel was big in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, well, if he was big in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, that means Belshazzar, because a lot of times it's not like Belshazzar is right there at his right hand all the time. A lot of times the king's son is kept separate or something. I don't know. Maybe it's to make it harder for assassins. I don't know. I don't even know if he's the grandson. Because like I said, when it says father, it can mean grandfather. That's often done in the Bible where they'll refer to someone as someone's, Abraham our father. That's way beyond grandfather. They use the same word as we would for forefathers. But it can mean direct father too, and I just don't remember. There's a man in thy kingdom, in the spirit of the holy gods. And again, that I do want to look at. Where'd my thing go? There we go. The holy gods. What verse was that? That was verse 10. Oh yeah. Came into the house, spake and said, let not... holy gods. So, Kadesh, which is holy, and Elah. Now again, the usual word for God is plural, which is Elohim. And that is the usual word the Bible in the Old Testament uses for God. There are other gods that they use, and they may even use Allah. I'm not sure if it's ever used for the true God, and that's something you can investigate. We're not going to do that deep of a word search on it. But it's not the usual word. And that's why it's lowercase, because she's using a term that's different. And also Chaldean, obviously, because they were still in the Chaldean section of the book of Daniel. It's not in Hebrew. And it must be kind of interesting if you're Jewish to read that it's in this other tongue, the tongue of the Babylonians. And as I read this, when we were reading this morning, I thought to myself, when I was reading it live here, I remember thinking to myself, was it Hebrew? They couldn't read Hebrew. I'm like, that's stupid. No, of course they would know that's a local language. I don't think it was something so elementary. I don't understand the writing on the wall, why they couldn't read it. I don't understand. I have guesses, and I'll guess right now. One, it was in some mysterious language to which God made Daniel know what it was. The other option is their minds were obscured, and they literally just looked at it. They couldn't read it because God obscured their mind. And that's the I prefer to think that is the actual answer, because that is like something you see examples of in the Bible and in the Gospels and stuff, like God telling him the language or something like that so he could read it himself. I think I don't know. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that the men's minds are obscured either. But, we have instances like for example, when Paul in 1 Corinthians, or is it 2 Corinthians, whichever one. I think it's first. Where he talks about the hidden wisdom, which none of the princes of this world knew, because if they known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. It's not that is the same thing, but it's a sort of example of the concept of God not really like hiding things in plain sight. And this I think he does. Because the Bible is a perfect example of this. Hidden in plain sight. Hidden in plain sight, the truth is. And it can be difficult for people to decipher because they're blinded by the fact that it comes in these stories and it's like this disjointed book that comes from all these different sources, because it comes from many different authors. You know, the holy prophets were inspired of old, you know, and they wrote, and the Psalms and the wisdom. But like the way in which they write and the things in which they write does not see that kind of like God initiating us into a secret language. Like I always thought the miracle of tongues was done in the mind of those who understood what was being said. But then on the other hand, it could be, which would be the reverse of this. But then again, that's a positive thing. So I don't know. I don't know if it's being concealed or if it's being revealed. You know what I mean, so to speak, like, meaning Daniel just walks up there and can read exactly what it says. Now, of course, understanding the interpretation, that has to come from God, right? In the days of thy father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods. I wonder if that word is the same. Like the wisdom of the gods, Elah again. Both Elah? Yeah, Elah. So this is not, they're not monotheists. They understand there to be many gods. But the assertion of the Bible is that there is but one. There's but one true God. There are many things called God and that are worshipped, but they are, according to Paul, that is what the corrupt vision of God has done through the hands of man. Meaning our vision of God is corrupted by our own corruption. Meaning we know we have a conscience and we have a piece of understanding of what God is. We don't have the fullness of understanding what God is. We don't know everything by any means. But we have some light given us. Every man that is entered into the world is given some portion of that light. Some small portion. I forgot who it was who said this, but it always stuck with me that when he talked about people being judged outside of Christ, who never knew Christ, never had an opportunity to hear the word of God, not even the law or anything like that. People died, they lived and died in some existence where God had not, no direct revelation to them. People would say, "Are they just there's no possibility?" It's like, look at. Personally, I don't think there's any hope of salvation outside of Christ, but He is also judge of all. So there you go. You've got to go through the judge. He's committed all judgment to the Son. So, anyways, what they would say, and I forgot who it was again. What he used to say, whatever pastor this was they'll be judged by the light that was given them, and I like that because we all have differing gifts in the church, but also in life we don't all start off with the same lot. Either by accident of birth in the family we're born into, we might be rich, we might be poor, we might have more native intelligence or less. And we're going to be judged based on that which we've been given. Like if I have a better insight into God, if I am born with a more accurate, or now let's say a more broad, innate moral sense than say somebody else, I have a greater judgment against me because I know more. And if I corrupt that, I've corrupted God's image in a greater way. And that's how they end up with gods, because they know God, but they don't want to glorify that as God. I don't want my God to be the righteous and holy Lord of heaven. No. I want my God to be like a tavern keeper who likes to drink wine, like me. He's like a great big bartender in the sky. That's my God. The God of wine, the God of hammers, the God of tools. That's what man wants to make a God like unto himself. And in fact, that's very often, if you think about it, blacksmiths would worship Hephaestus, the god of blacksmiths. Of course. They want a God like themselves, just like they want a king like themselves. They don't want God as their king. They want a king like them. It's like, but God was like, do you know what that means to have a king like you? He's going to be wicked and terrible. He's going to take your daughters for concubines and your sons for soldiers. You want a king? I was your king. They rejected God as their king, of course, just like they rejected God as their God. That's why it's like, don't envy the Jews. Certainly do not hate them, but don't envy them either in their position as God's chosen people, because a lot of what they went through is to demonstrate our unworthy nature, that no matter what God does for us, we of ourselves are, to say the least, disappointing. The heart of man is desperately wicked, above all things. Not that it can't be tamed, not that there's no good in you. In me, there is no good thing that is in my flesh. Dwelleth no good thing, per se. That the good in me comes from somewhere else. It comes from my clinging to an image of God that is true, to an image of God in me, because I am made in the image of God. And I know what that looks like, at least a bit. And when I cling to that, I'm looking and seeking and worshiping the true God. By if I know, thou shalt not kill, so I don't kill. Not because I'm afraid to kill. Maybe I want to kill somebody, but I'm going to spare his life, because you know what? God says, vengeance is mine. So I'll let him revenge. I am not saying that's necessarily true. I'm not a particularly, when it comes to things, I pray mostly not to enter into temptation, because things that inspire men to murder are awful things. And I've never been tempted like that. I've never had someone in my power who had oh, you murdered my father. Well, now you're in my power. I have you. And I'm going to show you mercy? I've never been tempted like that, so I don't know. I don't know what I would do. I never even been close to that. I've forgiven people for small things, even for some bigger things. I never forgive institutions, though. The companies that screw me over, I do not treat them as individuals that deserve forgiveness. I hate you forever, company. I'm sorry. I don't know if the Lord. I don't think that necessarily is wrong, right? I'm not so sure about that. The men assemble themselves by troops and they rip us off. I don't know. Be fair with me, I'll be fair with you. That's for sure. But the problem with a lot of businesses, especially the bigger they get, this becomes more true. There's just all these people working together and what they're really trying to do is maximize profits. They don't even know it. The person working at Walmart doesn't realize that their only purpose in life is to maximize profits for that company. They don't know that that's their purpose in being there and working there. Their job is to get paid as little as possible, to do as much work as possible within the in that what would you call it, that negotiation. And of course, you want to make your system as efficient as possible. But the problem is when those things get bigger and bigger, the people being used at the bottom become less and less well treated. Just like all those things, when you look at the statue, or the with the feet of clay and iron mingled. I mean, might as well just be clay, because like I said, the iron, the part strength in there. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link, as everyone should know. Okay, so light and wisdom and understanding like the wisdom of the gods was found in him. I always love the story of Solomon seeking wisdom, and when God said, "Ask me anything," and I don't remember if he said anything, but he asked him. He offered him something. I don't know, was it ask him anything that he would give him, or just ask me, "What would you have me give you?" I should go back and reread it because I don't remember if it was a blanket thing, which makes it real. Get anything, and he says, "Wisdom. Give me wisdom, so I can rule thy people well." It's like, the Lord, because he didn't ask him for riches, because he didn't ask him for all the things that people crave in life. That's why I've always in my prayer life, especially as time has gone on and I've become of greater understanding, I'd avoid praying about mundane stuff. I just leave it off. Because he knows what I have need of. He knows about my car problems. He knows about everything I have a problem with. He knows about all my issues. Not that I don't pray about some of that stuff, especially if it's something that's like sinful. I want to pray about that immediately and get that taken care of. But I'm talking about, you got bills, and let's pray over these bills. It's like, it's fine to do so. I don't want to shame anybody. But on the other hand, if you had one wish from God, you're going to make it about your car. You're going to make it about your house. You might make it about your children, right? You might make it about your family. You might make it about important things, truly important things. I know the car is a very important thing. We all need it to get around in the civilization we live in, especially me. I don't live in a city. I live in a rural area. Life would become extremely difficult very fast if we didn't have gasoline. It's something that bugs me about that. It's like I feel like I want to build a steam car. By the way, that's how nuts I am. Like, just keep it in there. Keep it in there for just in case. It basically be a large locomotive on the road, right? Yeah, it's probably illegal as can be, as far as like, maybe not illegal in that sense, but like, road illegal. Like, you couldn't take something like that out on the road. That's true. I wouldn't want to. I'd be saving it for the the post-apocalyptic nightmare escape we're headed towards. If the Lord doesn't come, we probably are headed towards some sort of not fully let's call it semi-apocalyptic nightmare, or fight against a nightmare. That's why I'm already fighting, because we must start fighting now, or So I just want to make sure that when they come for me, I've been very busy undermining and trying to destroy them with my words and my writings and my music. The evil forces that, the principalities and powers, rulers of the darkness of this world that are trying to unleash so much evil in this world. When you talk about, some things are obvious you shouldn't do. Like, you shouldn't drink out of the holy vessels of God's house and praise all these other gods. Even Nebuchadnezzar was superstitious enough not to do that. He thought he was pretty much something. You know what I mean? He did. But when I think about the doom of Babylon in Isaiah 14, I think he had more in mind Belshazzar. Even though, if you think about it, it compares, when you read Nebuchadnezzar's, what do we call it? His during the period of his chastisement, let's call it, when he was given the heart of a beast. It was for his benefit in the end. It was till he should know. That's a good thing. There was a goal in mind. The goal here is to give his kingdom to somebody else. But Nebuchadnezzar, when lifted up in pride, also fell. How art thou fallen from heaven, bright star, son of the dawn? And if you get offended me saying that instead of Lucifer, remember that is the doom of the king of Babylon. Or it's a proverb against the king of Babylon. The doom of Babylon begins in chapter 13 of Isaiah. In chapter 14 it says, "It shall come to pass in the day that the Lord shall give thee rest from your sorrow and from your fear and from the hard bondage wherein thou wast made to serve, that thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon. And say, how has the oppressor ceased? The golden city ceased. The Lord has broken the staff of the wicked, the scepter of rulers." I couldn't remember the verb broken. I was going to say vanquished, because I knew. See, that's the thing. It's like a lot of times you get the meaning of the words in your head because you know the scriptures. And the meaning is the most important part. You internalize what the scriptures mean, and then you have them in you. And I know it's impressive to quote verses and stuff, mostly to other Christians, okay? We don't need to get into a appendage measuring contest with each other. That's silly. That's of the flesh. It is. Because, like, memorizing... I used to want to impress people. I used to do fleshly, stupid things like that. Try to memorize a bunch of verses so that people would be impressed with my ability. Other Christians. Because I'll tell you what, when you preach the gospel, it's much more effective to just talk to people where they are as opposed to shoving the Bible verses in their face. You know, it says, God so loved the world that everyone knows that verse. Especially in this country. Now, if you were in the jungle, I would approach it differently. I might lead with the Bible. You know, I might lead with the Bible verses and stuff. This great book says these words, you know, maybe that there. But people who have like, yeah, I quit religion 20 years ago, that's not the argument that's going to win them over. throwing verses at them. Yeah, I was forced to memorize verses in junior high. I know that verse. I don't care for it. And some would say those are apostates. They have no hope. Some would say those people are still saved, because once saved, always saved. I say the Lord will judge. Okay, so Daniel was made master magician. She's just repeating this. I always like this kind of as an excellent spirit. An excellent spirit. What is an excellent spirit? What is she talking about? I just like the idea of having an excellent spirit. Light and wisdom. Excellent spirit. I was just curious how they express that, because a lot of times that's just a doubling of a word. Yatir, preeminent, surpassing. Knowledge is manda, which is one of the power of knowing. Understanding is, I can't pronounce. I can't see if that's an LR. I think it's sak leth anu, which is like insight. Interpreting of dreams, pishar, to interpret. And I'm just hovering over that, and I get a quick definition. If you use Bible Hub, you can also do the same. I do not think we need to go into a deep word study on these things, because they're basically face value or something like that. You know, a lot of words don't translate perfectly. And also, sometimes if we overemphasize the dictionary definition, that like substitutes for actually studying. Meaning, like I haven't actually gained any knowledge by going to the dictionary and getting a more specific definition and then applying a very specific definition based on the dictionary. I'm not necessarily growing, because the context is really governing everything. Like I said, this context is really just talking about how smart Daniel is, right? Interpreting dreams, showing of sentences. Sentences there is a riddle. Okay? Like, I always like the phrase about in Daniel about understanding dark sentences. Because I always thought, like, that sounds cool. I want to understand dark sentences. Is that okay? You know what I mean? But here's the thing. It's said there of the figure we will thumbnail sketch as a form of Antichrist, at very least. A type of Antichrist. You think like, okay, that's some sort of evil thing. Well, it's having insight into the darkness, into mystery, into things that are hidden. You know, sometimes people seek after hidden things. They intrude into things they don't understand, as Paul said, intruding into things they understand not. The worshiping of angels and of some of the other things he would say. You know, like going off the deep end into place. You know, that we use that analogy, but it means to take. You know, like I'm going to use another one. To take the plunge. And it's like but the idea is, you're going a place where you're taking a step that takes you much farther maybe than you had intended to go. Right? But anyways, understanding dark sentences, showing sentences. Dark sentences are things like this. Mene mene tekel upharsin. It's dark in two ways. Dark in that they can't understand what it says. Dark in that it spells doom. You know what I mean? And I'll tell you what. When when I read Solomon's story, I sought wisdom. I asked wisdom. I didn't ask for riches. Unfortunately for me, when I said, Lord, like Solomon, I'll take wisdom. I don't need to be rich. Blah 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 blah. Because I've always wanted to impress God, so I've always said unfortunate things like don't give me money and stuff like that. And there was another, and I was impressed. I've mentioned this before, like with what Jesus said to Thomas about blessed are those who believe without seeing. And I was like, I want to believe without seeing, Lord. Never show me anything. You know? And maybe you could say that's technically true. I haven't had any visions in particular. I've had dreams. Or a dream or two is really the truth. But, I regret that. But because like I said to Solomon, I'll give you wisdom. Because you ask for wisdom and not riches, you'll get wisdom and riches. And, sons and lands and all the other things you would expect. You will be very prosperous. And Solomon was very prosperous. He had all those things and wisdom, and he was still corrupted. That should scare you a little bit, right? That's a case worth watching. You know, it shows that you can have every advantage, and it's still, you know, that's why I just said, how hard is it for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God? And rich in many senses. For him, it was all the wives, all the women. They led him astray to please them, you know, because they pleased him, I guess, right? Why else would you care? You're a great king. These are just concubines and stuff. But he was seduced by them. Because the wisdom of man, there's, like it says in the Proverbs, there are some things that are too high for me. The way of a bird in the air and the way of a young man with a maid is another one of them. It's beyond the understanding of wisdom. Like, I guess. On some level, yeah, because wisdom goes out the window at the times. You can lose all wisdom when you're smitten with love or infatuation or many other strong emotions. It doesn't take a lot. It doesn't have to be true love. True love should actually be the product of wisdom because it's entered into wisely. And that's why it's true love, because it's more properly knitted together. And that's why I think his wisdom failed him. He had all the wisdom, but of course, wisdom is no good if you don't use it. If you act, because like, you can know all the right things, but as Paul said, but if you don't have power to do it, in me is, I don't have the power to do the right thing. I have the will to do the right thing, but why is it I have to overcome when I have the will? And the truth is, though, you only have a limited amount of willpower. And we have to figure out how to use that or get more from God. I think it's funny. Last time it was the same thing. I was 45 minutes into it, and I felt like I barely got started. What is going on? I don't want me to seem perturbed. I mean, I'm enjoying the study, but I'm not at verse 18 yet. Whatever, that card may change. That may be wrong. I may have to change that actually, right? I may say beginning at verse like 6 or something. I almost did say beginning at verse 6, and now I think I will. And I'll just change that on the card, and it'll still be in the live broadcast, but whatever. Beginning in that, I almost said verse 1 too. That was another one, because I was just like, oh, we're practically starting over, and we did. I like when it says hard sentences, you know, difficult to understand, hard as well. Let's see, I want to make sure. It's another word that means, hard sentences is one word. It means a riddle. Dissolving of doubts. I love that. That's another nice. The word does mean to loosen, which is similar to dissolve. Joint or not. Yeah. Not. The joint, I like the way it's untying knots is literally what it says. So even the King James here, it's actually literally loosening knots or joints. You know, because that's where doubt is, joints. Is that the same as like the joints of the loins? It's Q-tar. That's how it's spelled. Q-T-A-R. Q-tar is how it's pronounced. A joint or knot. And then, what was the other word? Oh, the joints of his loins. I want to see the joints of his loins. That probably is the joints of his loins, right? Joints, Q-tar, same word. Interesting. And this is, again, we're not getting much Hebrew out of this anyways. It's this is in Aramaic, which is Chaldean, I believe. Yeah. Something like that. I think that's right. Yeah. Isn't that right? I don't know. It's Chaldean for sure. Let's just leave it at that. And maybe Aramaic may be a later development. No, Aramaic I thought was another name for Syriac. I'm not a linguist or an expert on that front. And I don't try to be, so, or pretend to be. Okay, I have heard of thee that thou... Okay, wait, we're going back to what we want. All right, we've got that. So he was brought before the king. You know, he's got all this excellent understanding, dissolving, untying knots, solving riddles. That's, she was probably a girl of the court. She heard it and marveled. Many people probably did. But in a large court like Babylon, Belteshazzar has... Oh, I forgot this close. Belteshazzar is... It's interesting that their names are similar. Belteshazzar is Daniel. Belshazzar the king. Anyways, so the king sends for him. And he comes, and of course, the king makes this speech. I have heard of you, that the spirit of gods, the excellent wisdom. Same phrases, basically, same language. The wise men, the astrologers, and we're not going to break those down. We've talked about astrologers and wise men before, and that they should read this writing, make known to me the interpretation thereof. But they could not show me the interpretation. We talked today about what is that? Was it a question of being able to read a foreign language, or was it literally they looked at it and just could not decipher it? And Daniel just looked at it and said, "Oh, it says many, many tekel of farson." I know what that means. Because once you know what the words are, and Daniel probably being afraid of the situation, Belshazzar is sleeping at the wheel. He's getting drunk on the night he's about to lose his kingdom. Because I believe Babylon was overthrown by treachery. Am I wrong? You can leave a comment and below. It is not. I don't remember if it's told here in Daniel. I remember either my dad telling me or I heard there was something about they stopped up the river and were able to just circumvent the walls by going in the dry riverbed. And I hope that's not the story of some other city being conquered, which it could be. I believe that was how Babylon fell. So if you want, that's my memory. You can tell me if it's faulty in the comments. Okay, have a chain of gold. Oh, so Yahweh offers him that thing. You'll be clothed with scarlet, expensive cloth, a chain of gold about your neck. All these symbols of power and authority. Someone walk around in a scarlet robe with a chain of gold. That's someone who the king favors and who is, important. Especially, and you will be the third ruler. There must be a second ruler who's really important, right? Because there's the king. And Daniel says, let your gifts be to yourself. Keep your gifts. Wow. It's kind of harsh, right? Keep your gifts. I don't want them. I think he says it politely. That's why I read it politely. Because you do detect, Daniel's pronouncing judgment. I don't know how a prophet pronounces judgment without being just a little bit on the edge. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to say it. You're not going to deliver it. It's like, oh, king, I'm sorry to tell you, but God's not happy. I think it's interesting how the king just takes it and then gives him the chain of gold and the robe and makes the proclamation. Daniel doesn't refuse the gifts. Maybe the king gives it to him hoping Daniel will be killed. I don't know. I don't think so. He's probably kind of stunned. He wanted to know what it meant. Now he knew. Sometimes when you rebuke people, they get angry. They turn again and rend you, just like Jesus said, when you cast your pearls before swine. They do not necessarily want to hear your little pearls of wisdom. Other times, though, people hear and they repent and it's over and they're forgiven, like Nebuchadnezzar. Even though it was 7 years in the field, or I say 7 years, but it was like 7 times, probably years. Could have been months, or seasons of the year, who knows. I think that meant 7 times is a perfection of time, and the reason it doesn't specify years, days, months, because it could be any of those, probably. It could be 7 minutes. It could be 7 hours. It could be 7 days until you know. How's he going to know as a beast? Well, until God decides to reveal it to you. It could be 7 years. It is to be known. It's like we are scheduled to be ultimately defeated by the forces of evil. At least to be, not ultimately, I should say, to semi-ultimately be defeated. The penultimate challenge is death. The ultimate is glory, resurrection, and life forevermore. So, before he makes known the interpretation, he gives them this preamble. How that the Most High God had given Nebuchadnezzar this amazing kingdom with majesty, glory, and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages. Again, Literally, you mean even in Africa, even in South America? No, all people, nations, and languages feared before him. If they were present, if they knew about Nebuchadnezzar, they were scared of him. It doesn't mean you don't take that literally. It's a figure of speech. It means like you are an uncontested ruler here. No one anywhere within range can contest your power. At least that was your father's days that he's talking about, Nebuchadnezzar. That's not true of Belshazzar. His power is about to go poof this very night. And that happens to be the very night he violated the temple vessels with his drinking and carousing and blessing of other gods. So it's like I was saying, I had this impression earlier that Nebuchadnezzar's golden kingdom is, what was golden about it? It wasn't bigger than the other kingdoms. But in some way, he was a bigger dude in his kingdom. Like, not every king can just do whatever he wants. That's not true. I mean, they do a lot of what they want, but they have to consider, every king is supported by an army and by other big dudes, let's say, lords and such, who support him and enable him to have, especially in the feudal system, but even in ancient times, like they depend on a lot of people to be able to exercise that unlimited power. You know what I mean? Like, you have to have, that space created where you can exercise unlimited power, and it has to be supported by all kinds of systems of control with people. And they have to all sort of agree to participate. You go too far, you do whatever you want, you start becoming crazy. The Praetorian Guard has a knife for your back, and that has happened with some of the Caesars who were too nuts. Their own bodyguard would kill them. I believe that at least happened once, right? So, but Nebuchadnezzar ascends to the kind of power where he can do just about whatever he wants. He can kill who he wants. Anybody. Nobody's safe. Almost like the absolute ruler of China is close to that kind of a golden kingdom, in the sense that the king would look at it as being absolute power, absolute control. And the reason I say that's what it means is because that's how it's defined. Your father was a great king. Everyone was scared. I wanted to use an adjective I don't want to use. They were scared awfully of him. Scared completely. Scared out of their pants. Other kings, they will tremble before them also, but somewhat lesser. Not quite so golden. Like I said, you think, Alexander was a great conqueror, but his own men nearly murdered him in order to get him to turn back from India. It was very close there for Alexander. I mean, like, there's willingness to say, like, all right, maybe we don't do everything he says, huh? If you get enough people together, that's where assassination and stuff comes in. Nebuchadnezzar had that power. The only one who could take it from him was God. And you notice, when he turned into a beast, they could finally drive him out. He was that absolute. Probably because I think he was personally magnetic and fierce. And he could back it up. Because Nebuchadnezzar always comes off as being ruthless and strong. I mean, he built that kingdom. That's what his heart, he was lifted up. Is not this Babylon that I raised up? Babylon had existed, but he brought it to, it was the Neo-Babylonian kingdom, man. They were back. You have not humbled your heart. You are his son. I was of us, though you knew all this. And we focus on the fact that he knew. He knew all this. He may not have remembered Daniel too well, but he probably knew about his father or grandfathers madness, that's for sure. And his return, and then he died in peace, I can only assume. That's why, one of the things, that's why I do look at that sometimes. Like, there's a sentiment in the Bible, like it says of Joab, when David lie dying? But he says, don't let his hoar hairs go down to the grave in peace. Don't let him die in peace. Being able to die in peace is something that we look at as a sign of God's favor. That's why the cross is such a interesting, confusing thing, because obviously Jesus didn't die in peace. And so while there are certain, I talked about this many times, there are certain kinds of deaths that I think would look really bad for me. I wouldn't be surprised if people on earth wondered if I was going to make it. Like married man, shot in the back while seeing a prostitute. Maybe God wasn't happy. Sometimes bad things happen because we're doing bad things. Yep, that happens. Now, I don't believe you can lose your salvation, because those who are truly saved are saved by the power of God, and He is the one working this. But I am always anxious, and you should be, not to leave, don't leave, lest a promise should be left behind, we should seem to come short of it. I don't want to even look like I'm falling short of the promises of God. I want to look like a Christian. You've not humbled your hearts, but done this. You've lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven. And they've brought the vessels. Let me see here. Why did I hit the... Oh, because I'm using this awful keyboard. It doesn't differentiate. All right. There's no way I'm just going to pretend like we covered it entirely. We're going to pick it up. I already kind of talked about this, right? I did. So I'm not going to say verse 23. And even this part, and the God whose hand thy breath is, and whose is all thy ways, you have not glorified. Then was the hand, part of the hand sent from him, and this is the writing that was written. Or maybe I could take just an extra 5 minutes, and we can finish the chapter. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, we're going to finish this. We're just going to take a couple minutes, because really, I don't have a lot to say about it. Daniel completely into. That's why this whole chapter is like sort of, I find myself meandering through it. I got a ton of things to say. It's a fascinating story, but the verses themselves individually don't carry a lot of extra meaning. It's all together that they mean something. So, I mean, not that I don't, there are isolated verses here. Like I'll point out some verses are just axiomatic, or like, judge not according to the outward appearance, but judge righteous judgment. Like that's a verse that requires no context. No context at all. Now, in context, you can learn even more from it, and you'll get even maybe a bit of nuance in that. But it does stand completely on its own. Unlike a verse like, say, judge not that you be not judged. That's not even a whole verse. But judge not according to the outward appearance, but judge righteous judgment. You can just take that whole phrase and put it in your pocket. You don't need to worry about where it came from. Okay, so, but these often, I can't just quote this to my neighbor, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. It's like, or to another, because people will quote verses to themselves as if they're for them. And I'll tell you what, I claim verses for myself. I'm not against that. Like, Lord, do for me as you did for David. Lord, let no weapon formed against me prosper. Let no device that comes, that would cause to make me fall be successful. Intercept my enemies, like you did for your servants of old. Let them not come near me or my house. I have no problem with that. But, someone could say to someone like, well, the Bible says, I know the plans I have for you to give you a future and a hope, and da-da-da-da-da-da, just to some random person on the street. And my thing was, if you quote that person, I would say to them, wouldn't you like to be in a religion where you could potentially apply that to yourself in the future? Because it doesn't really necessarily apply to that person. If they're not ever going to believe in God, that He's given them no future and no hope. If they don't believe in Christ, if they aren't going to believe in Christ either, it's like, because God knows, He knows who He calls and those who He chooses. And when He calls them and chooses them and they come, That's no. God isn't like, oh, I'm so glad I got them. I thought they might be lost there for a second. I don't agree with that. Okay. You drank wine. Okay. Oh, many tekel upharsin. God hath numbered your kingdom and finished it. I was numbered, weighed, and wanting. Or numbered, weighed, divided. That's right. Numbered, weighed, divided. Because that's what tekel means, to weigh, and Perez, divided. I think that it has to be, well, like I said, if those were the actual words on the wall, if those are literally the words, because I don't think these are nonsense words. We're going to check that. The one last thing we're going to do, that we will have pretty much. Mene is a measure of weight. Tekel, upharsin. I want to see if, okay. We got mene, a measure of weight. So that is a real word. It's Aramaic. Corresponding to mana in, not manna, but mana. Similar word in Hebrew, right? Tekel. And again, this to call. That's a lot. That's shekel. Corresponding to shekel, to balance or to be weighed. Or close to it, anyways. To call. T-qual. That looks a lot like joint, too, doesn't it? I forgot what that was, how similar that was. And this one, paras. To break in two. And then where's upharsin? T-call. Oh, way. Tekel. Mene. Paras. Well, I don't know why they've spelled upharsin. What? Huh. Because he says it. That is weird. I don't get that. Maybe I'm sure someone could explain it. Why does he say upharsin up there, and then Perez down here? And wait, did I just look up? Maybe I grabbed Perez and didn't grab upharsin. Let's do that again. Upharsin. Apparently, this is it. Maybe it's wrong, because I have found problems in the online Bible sometimes. I'm just like my Strong's Concordance. I had an old copy that had the hard to read writing, and I used to make notations of where there were mistakes, because it was loaded with mistakes. Not so many that it was distracting, but if you do a significant amount of word study using a Strong's Concordance, the old-fashioned way, and an older copy, because I think they corrected a lot of the typographical, and because it's usually typographical, the kind of thing which is like, oh, there's two numbers are switched or things like that. Oh, it's not 5112, it's 5121, that sort of thing. I remember thinking I should send these to the publisher, but I bet they got it figured out. All right. Okay, so there's no special. Why is this different? A more well-rounded Bible scholar could probably tell you. All right. About the idea. Tekel is weighed in the balances. What is this worth? What is this good? You are weighed and found wanting. That's another. I love that phrase. Thou art weighed and found wanting. God hath numbered your kingdom and finished it. It's like all the numbers are out. The idea of numbering, count the number of the beast. The numbering of something means sort of, there's a sort of a evil connotation with it sometimes. David got in trouble for numbering his people, for counting them. And, you think well, what's the big deal? Well, it might be revealing something like nefarious, actually. How many people do we have? In a sort of that sort of a thing. I put my fingers, for those only listening, I put my fingers together like some sort of evil planner. But when he tells them this, and he concludes with your kingdom divided and given to the Medes and I always imagine you could hear a pin drop in that room when he said that. They're all just, buzzkill. Right? Major buzzkill here with Daniel coming in to deliver the words of doom. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians, and that night he was slain. Even so, he immediately, I imagine it's quiet, and he's like, and they come, immediately have him clothed in scarlet, put the chain about his neck, make the proclamation, Belteshazzar is the third ruler in the kingdom. I'll tell you what, I gotta say this for him. That's what I was gonna say before. He reminds me a bit of Judas. It's that regret that is not acceptable to God. You know what I mean? It's not, I mean, Nebuchadnezzar, his repentance, his change of heart was received. But before it was received, God also did him a favor in chastising him, in making him like a beast. Belshazzar is expected to just look at that example and learn. You know, you can learn things the hard way or the easy way. I always tell my kids, it's like I learned many lessons the hard way, and I tell you about those so that you can learn about the easy way, which is by listening. You know, by giving heed and paying attention to what your elders or parents say, you can learn things that will help you avoid painful things later. Everything I've ever learned about relationships, I try to communicate in some way or another, down the line, as far as about, what you should look for in a wife, what you should look for in a husband, right? All those things. Anything you think that is important to you about what your kids will do in the future, you should talk to them about. Career, and be wise about it. Not, a lot of parents put their kids into careers that's no good for their life. If you have a daughter, no, she's going to want to have babies at some point. She will. And if she waits too long, it's going to be sad because she may not be able to. And you should tell them the truth about that. And saying, whatever career you pick something you can go back to after you have children, unless it's so important to you that you want to sacrifice family life. Because it's not for everybody, that's for sure. But you can warn most girls to say, you don't know yet, you probably won't for a couple of years, but you're probably going to want to have children at some point in the future. Nature will call. It's for most people. Anyways, I know I'm talking about that because Belshazzar did not receive the instruction of his father. And that is what cost him his kingdom. That night he was slain. He was rebuked. He did not turn on him. He did not say, how dare you say these things about my kingdom? He fulfilled his word, which is a righteous thing to do. But God did not forgive him. And that's a very, that's a stern warning to people. When we know better, it's not just about any old sin. I mean, he has done something. He's drunk, it's like, it reminds me of the vision you see of Mystery Babylon drunken with the blood of saints. There's something very similar to drinking from the cup of God's temple. Because the altar in heaven, what is under the altar in heaven is all the slain saints, or at least the memory thereof, in some sort of symbolic fashion, in the way I look at it. Because the idea of heaven, I don't want, can you imagine like having to be in heaven and watch your children struggle and your grandchildren struggle? Would you find that? I wouldn't watch, if that was the case. I don't believe it works that way, but hey. And it probably is silly to think they do watch if they could watch. I have always said, like, once you come into contact with God, do you really think you'd really want to pay much attention to anything else for a good long while? He's infinite. You ever looked at the universe? God's more vast and detailed and interesting than the universe itself and life itself and all those things. He has all those things wrapped up in one and more, because he is that person who is responsible for everything. And I don't mean person in the Trinitarian sense. I mean, because God is a person in that sense, but also in that God is not just some force. He is not just some, genie or slave of, to his own ways. He is a intelligent and willful being. I almost said creature, but that's exactly the wrong word, right? Creator. They worshipped and served the creature more than the creator, and that's how they get into trouble. Same thing with Belshazzar. His father had this amazing experience. Belshazzar would have witnessed it, and he did not take one bit of wisdom from it. And that was his end. I don't see anything like this being true for a Christian that we got to look out for, but I'm just saying, when you see people behaving in such ways, they better look out, or you better look out. I don't want to be in the way when the punishment comes. Like I don't know if I'd want to be in Daniel's position wearing that chain of gold when the Medes are at the door, but no doubt his wisdom will get him by. Belshazzar is probably slain because he fights or whatever. I mean, very often kings are subjugated. He may have already been resisting Persia, no doubt. Okay, so we're finished with chapter 5. We'll pick up at chapter 6 next time. Thanks for joining me. We went way over, but that's all right. We had a 15-minute deficit last week. Didn't we do one study? It was only 45 minutes, so there you go. Until next time.
And there shall be desolation, because thou hast forgotten the God of thy salvation, and hast not been mindful of the rock of thy strength. Therefore shalt thou plant pleasant plants, and shall set it with strange lips. In the day shalt thou make thy plant to grow, and in the morning shalt thou make thy seed to flourish. But the harvest shall be a heap in the day of grief and of desperate sorrow.